So I would say the process of working with nature in general kind of taps into that flow state, where it kind of leads to this like almost an egoless state, like um, you're not yourself anymore. You like actually are the environment, um, or there's just this nonverbal state of mind happening um, as you're honing in on all these different textures and colors and the way the light moves. Like it's just a different mode of thinking entirely.
Uh, Folks, my incredible guest today is Michael Grab. Michael is one of the world's premier rock balancing artists. He has created rock art all over the world and has inspired a global movement for stone balancing art. Michael, sir, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
It is my pleasure. So, for starters, I was curious what you call yourself, and I hope I got that right. But would rock balancing artists sound about right, or is there a different term you would use?
Um, Generically, yeah, I guess that's what I would call myself. I just call myself a professional artist, or not even professional. I just an artist, or a person, or a human. Um, I kind of shy away from the word artist a little bit, but that's, I guess, conventionally what I am.
Yeah, well, that was actually sort of bleeding into my next question, which is perfect, which is, how do you think of yourself in terms of identity? It sounds like maybe an artist at your core, because I'm thinking you could be an artist, there's sort of like an engineering aspect to this.
Yeah.
There's about being in nature, and it was just how is that is an artist how you feel at your core? Is that your identity?
Yeah, that's probably at the base of kind of what I do is just approaching things from a creative mindset, and creative intent. And there's a lot of parts of my mind that go into that. Like you mentioned, kind of an engineering type of mindset or whatever. I don't really think about engineering at all when I'm doing it, but that goes into kind of the meticulous aspect of balancing these rocks.
Hmm. So I should say that the reason we're sitting here, it had to be like maybe 2 decades ago. I was on a hike. I don't know where I was. Maybe it was California. I think it was somewhere out west. And I stumbled across this rock structure. I was just there in a creek bed wherever we were hiking. I'd never seen something like this before. I was completely mesmerized. I literally just sat there for 10 minutes, like staring at the structure. How in the world are these rocks balanced like that? Who's behind this? Why does it even exist? And the memory sort of stayed dormant for years and years and years. And somehow, like a few weeks ago, it all came back. I don't even know what triggered the memory. And I said, this is a really fascinating thing I completely forgot about. And then I go online, I Google, like who's the best in the world at this thing. And your name came up over and over and over again. So anyway, here we are. And to those, whether they're watching or they're listening, if you haven't seen these structures, you have got to go online. Gravity Glue is your website. And look at, I can't even do justice trying to explain it, but they are the most beautiful gravity defying rock structures, if that's the right word, pieces of art, as you put it, that you could ever imagine. It's absolutely captivating, as much today for me as it was back in the day. So anyway, all to say that I'm really thrilled to be spending time with you here. Um, so Michael, you've said that your goal is to make something as impossible as possible. That's your quote. So with that, do you start out with a vision when you're doing a project of what you want the rock structure to look like? You know, like as you said, you're an artist, like an artist starting a painting, and this is your canvas? Or do you sort of wing it, like look for interesting rocks and gravity to find ways to stack them up, and then just sort of see how it turns out? What's your process?
Pretty much exactly the latter part of what you said. It's kind of winging it every time. I never really go out with an envisioned idea. I just kind of go there and sit in the space, sometimes for hours, and just kind of sit around and do nothing and look for rocks. Not even necessarily look for rocks. I let them find me in a way. Um, but just kind of keeping my radar wide open for any kind of thing that catches my attention or curiosity, specifically in the medium of rocks, usually. And I start collecting ones that are interesting or ones with nice colors, shapes, and I put them all in one place and kind of make a little seat for myself and just start building. And it's just a very organic process, and the rocks almost dictate the final arrangement that they end up in. And of course, it goes through my aesthetic kind of framework or whatever. Um, but yeah, they just they usually surprise me at the end. Um, or like I usually attempt things that challenge my current ability to the maximum to where when I finish it, um, like there is this genuine surprise and kind of joy in realizing that, oh yeah, this is possible.
Hmm. You said earlier that you look for the rocks, or maybe the rocks find you.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Um, it's more, I guess it's a bit more woo-woo or like like a philosophical kind of statement, but just kind of this mechanism of the universe where what you're looking for is also looking for you. Um, that's just kind of uh, maybe a light belief that I subscribe to.
Hmm. Have you always felt that way, or has that something that's
And not necessarily. I would say that's evolved over time, and that's probably influenced by like various kind of psychedelic experience, and like philosophical study and just different things I've picked up over the years.
so? There's the structure itself, and there's also the location, and these are all throughout Mother Nature. We're finding places along a meandering river. Is there something you're looking for in terms of a spot, or do you tend to go back to the same spot? Of course, you travel all over the world doing this, but when you're back home, you're in Colorado. Is that still where you are?
Yeah, Colorado.
Yeah. So, is there a typical spot you go to, or are you always looking for something new? And what are you trying to look for in terms of the right location to drive your inspiration?
Um, I've done most of my work in Boulder Creek in Boulder, Colorado. Um, and I'm not always there, but that's kind of uh, what I think of as home. And when I'm going to the creek there, I kind of just drift around until a place feels right or feels good to me. Um, and I have a lot of go-to places. I kind of call them power spots, um, that just kind of seem to have this innate outflow of energy, that I'm able to kind of like harness, I guess, or inspiration maybe. And that depends on a lot of different factors, like just the visual aesthetic of the place, like how conducive it is to doing my photography that I also love to do. And the types of rocks that are there, and the way the light hits it at different times of year influences the specific locations. Like I have winter spots and I have summer spots, and um, that just comes with being out there so often and kind of learning the ins and outs of how the environment changes with the seasons.
You ever think about how old these rocks are? I mean, I did a Grand Canyon hike last year, and as we were going down and up the canyon, looking at the strata that go back, I don't know how, millions and millions of years. I don't know how far back these rocks go, but it's sort of interesting, or at least has always fascinated me a little bit.
Yeah, I don't think of it too much kind of in the moment. But like all the granite in Boulder Creek is, I think, between like 1.3 and 1.4 billion years old. Um, and it's kind of different everywhere. Like I would imagine the Grand Canyon is a lot younger stone. Um, and in Loch Ness, for example, like that's some of the oldest stone in the world. And yeah, I guess there is a different feeling attached to it. And maybe it's a placebo and me knowing how old it is, but the rocks there have a certain kind of like magic in them that um, was incomparable to anywhere else.
Mm. So just to rewind a bit to the origin of all this, I think all of this started as a hobby, 2008, if I got the year right in Boulder. What were the
Um,
circumstances? Yeah.
yeah, basically kind of started by accident.
Mm,
Um, I was sitting in Boulder Creek, I think on a weekend on a sunny day in August, and hanging out with a friend, and um, we were actually both tripping on LSD at the time, and
mm,
just kind of enjoying the summer day and trying to get away from the heat. So we were in the creek, just kind of looking for rocks. I think we were specifically looking for obsidian at the time, which I've come to learn is mostly slag glass in Boulder Creek, is just kind of industrial waste.
mm,
Um, but yeah, we were looking for this kind of black glass and kind of moving rocks out of the way and just kind of sitting there in the water. And I think just being in that time and place and state of consciousness um, just led to this kind of hypersensitivity to or hyper focus on the actual rocks, like almost a childlike focus,
mm,
and kind of I don't know, the way children play is very in tune with the present moment. Like they get very focused on what they're doing, and it was similar to that, I would say. Um, and yeah, just rocks started ending up on top of each other, but kind of moving them out of the way and kind of next to us and running out of space. So there's only one place to build is up.
mm,
Um, so yeah, we started doing that, and I kind of uh, just found it to be a very meditative, therapeutic activity, and it kind of, I guess, flicked a switch maybe, or I just fell in love with it immediately, and I was just thought it was really amazing, and I have to go out and do that as soon as possible again. And so I think I was out the next day even. Um, and then just started kind of doing it from there on the weekends away from my job at the time.
mm. It's it's always fun to hear how these things start and how they pick up steam. Uh, because you were with someone else at the time, it sounds like, yeah, and
Yeah, I was
and
with a
maybe
friend at the time.
Yeah, and the friend didn't take this and then pursue it, but it somehow caught you in a way beyond what it did for him, and you just decided this was something you wanted to start investing a lot of your time in. Obviously, you didn't at the time think that this might be something you could in any way ever conceive of pursuing for a living, right? It was just an interesting hobby for you.
Yeah, it was just basically a way to waste time, and it also appealed to my kind of um, mind for design and kind of engineering and building things. Like I always played with Lego as a kid. Um, and so putting these things together and problem solving a way to make it work in an unconventional way just really appealed to the core of my creative self.
Mm. And I mean, if you're playing with Legos, you're probably playing with Legos inside. If you're an artist, you're
Yeah.
probably painting somewhere inside in a controlled environment. And of
Mhm.
course, this is out in an uncontrolled environment. You're out in Mother Nature. Is that part of the appeal? Were you really into just exploring and hiking and just being outdoors?
Yeah, well, I've generally just been kind of addicted to being outside and playing outside all while I was growing up and just in general. So I think I grew up with like a little bit of attachment to just being in nature. Um, and so the aspect of this that it is in nature and it is outside my control um, is a huge appeal to me. It's one of the things that I love most about it. Um, and just kind of the idea of land art as a movement that I've learned a lot about kind of over the years since beginning that. Um, like I would say I probably went balancing rocks and thinking I was only the only one doing it for several years before I started finding people online. So I had no idea what land art was at the moment, and I didn't even specifically imagine rock balancing as an art. And it's been kind of hard to establish it as like an accepted art form. Um, but I think very truly at its core, it is like a very highly technical art form.
No, 100%. It honestly is really beautiful. And how many years did it take to get to the kind of level that you're at today? Was that like overnight or was that years and years in the making?
Hmm. Well, I started practicing obsessively. Like I would go out on weekends, both Saturday and Sundays, any days off, and probably go out for at least 8 hours a day and just start stacking huge gardens in the creek and of like 30 to 40 stacks. And so it was just this kind of constant mill of like building these things and kind of getting these edges and uh, basically a um, just a very intense learning period for several years. And um, I would say after a year or two, I started just getting more precise with it and more impossible with it and experimenting with more vertical arrangements and points. And but I also looking at my very first set of photos from that first day, um, it's fair to say that from the beginning, I always had kind of like an aesthetic direction in what I was making. Like I wasn't just stacking, I was um, creating sculptures of some kind. Um, and so to get to the level I am now, um, I don't know, it's not really ever finished. Um,
Mhm.
like the all the stuff on my website is pretty out of date or in need of an update very badly. But that
I
stuff
notice. I
is,
notice.
yeah, that stuff is all from, or mostly from 2016 and before. And all most of that, a lot of that stuff is extremely technical. Um, but there's more past that that's even more technical and kind of, um, so I don't know. It's just kind of an organic growth process. Like it exploded maybe in the first 5 to 7 years, and then it kind of like reached this plateau where it's like kind of more stabilized, or it's harder. Like the better I got at it, the harder it is or has been to kind of one up myself, or that's kind of like how I approach it each day is like, oh, I want to do better than I did yesterday, or I want to make something that's my new favorite. Um, And so that's usually how I approach these things is just something that feels like my new favorite or challenges me enough in the moment to where it feels like this is all there is. And of course, it has like all those past experiences wound up in it.
I want to come back to this idea of one-upping yourself, because it's really interesting because when you're setting the standard, right, there's no one to compete with other than yourself, if that's even the right word here. Um, but to come back to creating these structures,
Hmm.
and Michael, maybe just to break it down to the real core element of balancing a rock on top of another. And again, those listening, you've got to go look at the pictures because this isn't like, oh, put it in the obvious place right above the rock. These are in very precarious positions that look like they shouldn't be balanced, and somehow they are. In some cases, maybe because of the weight on the rock above it to balance the one below it, and so on. So there's clearly a technique there. I think I read something about you're trying to find some kind of natural tripod in the rock, feeling the notches in the rock move over one another. Could you just talk about how this works, what you're feeling for, what you're looking for, just the actual technique of balancing a rock?
Yeah, well, I want to go back to an initial comment that you made, which is very common, um, especially among like I guess um, just intellectual people is like, oh, it's defying gravity. And that's
It
absolutely
looks like
not,
it is. It looks like it is.
yeah, and that's absolutely not what it's doing. It's actually like a strict collaboration with gravity. And
Mm.
so, and like the edges of these rocks. So like I'm basically looking for imperfections in a rock. Like this is one I brought in the other day, and it's just a piece of sandstone from the hill outside. But it has like all these kind of edges and kind of notches and grooves and whatever. And um, like down on the bottom here, you could even see there's a little hole in it. And so I'm looking for things like that because those edges around that hole can offer this kind of mechanism that it requires for balance, which is kind of like a tripod, um, just to be able to stand on any kind of surface. It needs 3 points of contact for like a static balance. Um, so I'm looking basically for any kind of minuscule character of this rock that's going to allow it to stand in a certain way with another rock. And it doesn't have to be a hole like this. Like this hole or edge would have to match up with some kind of convex edge of another rock that would like kind of sit in there, and I can kind of center it on it to stand. So it's kind of matching up like this concave and convex edges to a point where they become static. Um, and like with the counterbalancing, as you mentioned, um, for example, like this flatter surface down here, I would kind of like put that over a rock like that and hold it up there like that, or else like just basically mimic the force of gravity or what it would need to hold it in place, and then grab another rock that I can replace that force with and kind of like balance it over here, and all of a sudden there's kind of like a big top rock here. Um, and just the way it's counterbalanced, it starts to look kind of impossible.
So Michael, what you just described, you mentioned you were, as you were practicing and learning this craft, you were spending upwards of like 8 hours a day. So when you're in that kind of practice, hours and hours on end, trying to balance these rocks, are you, was that enjoyable? Was the actual practice to enhance your skill an enjoyable pursuit, or was it painful, if you will, like learning an instrument is for a lot of people, especially yours truly here. What was that something that came easy to you? Talk to me about what that was like when you're not that good at it, but you want to get good at it.
Well, I don't know. I guess that's a little bit of the, uh, or not the exact vibe that's going on. Because when I was learning, and like I didn't really have a lot of examples to kind of like look up to,
Mhm.
or like have something like, oh, I want to do that. Like it was all this very organic personal learning process. Um, and so I was never really trying to achieve anything. I was just kind of like edging myself forward, um, until something new happens, and then it's like, oh, that's interesting. Now I'll try it. I'll expand on that and, take what I learned in that structure into this one. Um, and I think it's just a little bit of, innate human nature to want to kind of push it a little bit, um, or see how far it can go before it collapses, or just like test possibility. Um, and that's kind of how I learned all this skill that I have now. Is just kind of like kind of flirting with these limits that I would run into with each structure. Um, and yeah, like I said, just kind of like trying to one up myself each time and do better and better and better, which is also kind of an unsustainable type of approach, because I don't think it's always going to get better and better and better. Um, it's more, um, I don't know. It's more in the process, I guess.
Mm.
Like not really trying to achieve anything, just kind of like going with the flow and kind of picking up skills along the way.
It take hours these days to build one of these pieces of art, if you will. Yeah.
It can, like there's a big difference between my personal work that I'll do alone in a creek or wherever, and, um, like what I would do at an event performing live. Um, because like the ones I build at an event, like they're usually a lot bigger, or they're more characteristic of my older stuff to where they're like almost my height. And that's more usually just to fill kind of the bigger space of whatever event site. Um, but I like to kind of build in these more technical aspects like counterbalancing and larger top rocks,
Mhm.
into these high structures. So, like, I was performing or kind of doing live demonstrations at, this land art festival in Texas I always do called Llano Earth Art Festival. And, it would have been easy for me to come up with some kind of arrangement to perform that I knew I could do. Um, but I specifically chose to do something that felt uncertain, and it was something that forced me to focus, or else I would really hurt myself, kind of thing.
Mm,
Um, and I think that's like the really deep quality that people can get from watching this process is like when someone's totally like I kind of compare it to like guitar face when like a musician is like playing some crazy music and they're totally zoned in whatever flow. Um, like that's just really important to me in the process is kind of getting in that space where I'm not in control, but like maybe I can keep it in control.
mm. I mean, I would think it would require a tremendous amount of patience. Not just you got to find the right setting, you got to find the right rocks, and then you find the rock and to get them into a stable position so the structure won't collapse on you. But I imagine, and you can tell me otherwise, but it does collapse probably from wind or from the currents moving or what have you, and then you're starting all over, from scratch. So are you just naturally a very patient person, or do you not even see it that way?
Um, I guess I don't quite see it that way. Like I wouldn't consider myself a patient person, um, especially when dealing with like people, for example. I'm a lot less patient, but um, if I'm dealing with like rocks in this creative process, um, I get frustrated if I'm like, or I can get frustrated if I'm like the more technical I get, the more I have an idea that I'm trying to achieve. Like once I kind of like stumble into that sequence, like once I figure out what sequence I'm settled on and really want to hone into, like that becomes an expectation that I'm trying to achieve. And when I am failing to meet that expectation, that leads to frustration, I think, in kind of anybody. Um, but it's also this kind of thing that I'm so used to doing for such long periods of time that I don't really think about it that way. It's just like, oh yeah, if I don't get it now, I'm just gonna come back and make it happen tomorrow. Um,
I'd like, Michael, when you've been working, let's say, hours on end building one of these,
mhm,
meticulously, one rock on top of the next, on top of the next, you're almost done. Maybe there's one final rock to put in place, and then you can start doing your photography and videography. And at the last second, the wind picks up, and boom, the whole thing falls apart. So like I'd be, I'd be the guy screaming in agony and like pulling my hair out, and I'm thinking, like you don't do that. So is it when that happens? How do you react in the moment to that kind of situation?
mm. Well, I don't end up in that situation very often. Um,
Oh, it never happens. The thing never collapses on you as you've been working at it for a while.
well, it does, but like sometimes I get very frustrated, especially if it's cold out and my fingers are getting numb and I'm really trying to figure this thing out before the temperature drops below freezing or nightfall comes and whatever. Um, like sometimes I'll go out and try to build something leading into the beginning of a snowstorm. And if I don't do that, then I consider that whole snowstorm kind of wasted creatively because like I need the structure to stand before it freezes. Um, Otherwise, it's just kind of like a bit of a crapshoot from there. Um, but if I can get it standing before it freezes, then it kind of like almost sticks and starts accumulating snow, and I can grow ice around it, and it
Mm,
becomes this whole other kind of living creation. So when I don't get that, or it looks kind of grim,
mm.
I get very frustrated, um, to the point where I can like start swearing and whatever. Um, but also, I think it's just kind of healthy to let off that steam in those kind of ways.
Well, but just take that as an example, right? So something happens like this, and you get really frustrated. You start swearing. How do you then get past that and recenter yourself and come back, to the right state of mind? Is there a technique you use? How do you work through that?
Well, I'll usually just kind of like step back for a minute and just like breathe a bit and just consider like, oh yeah, I'm running out of time and this and night is coming and this storm is coming. And so I just get right back in there and start doing it again. And um like you usually the initial phases of a structure are a lot less taxing than kind of the final stages. Um, and so those initial stages tend to just kind of calm me out or calm me down again and kind of put me in that space naturally. And it more often than not works out by the end. I just kind of like get it at the last possible moment. Um, and I'm trying to remember something else you were asking about. Oh yeah, um, you're asking about if they collapse on me, and like one of the riskiest parts I would say is like I'm usually sitting and my arms and legs are kind of scaffolded around this sculpture. Like my knees are supporting different parts and my elbows and whatever. Um, so once it's balanced, getting away from it is kind of a risky process without triggering it to collapse. Like, because if I bump it whatsoever, then it's collapsing on me essentially. Um, so it is a little bit of an art to like get my body out of there safely. Um, but once that is kind of there, like I usually don't start building into windy conditions. Like I'll kind of sit there until uh, like I refer to Carlos Castaneda in his books referring to like a tremor in the air with like sorcery and stuff. And it's kind of this intuition or this feeling, like sensing the environment, um, and kind of sensing this moment when the wind kind of like drops below a certain threshold, um, which I've gotten pretty good at. It's kind of like kind of sensing this moment when it's like okay to start building. And so that's when I usually start building. And at that point, it's not much of a risk that the wind is going to blow it over. Um, and also, like the structure itself, I'll kind of build in dialogue with whatever wind conditions or just weather conditions or environmental conditions are happening at the moment.
Mm.
So I'll kind of build wind resistance into it somehow. But I generally don't like to start until like the wind is like under a certain threshold.
Yeah. Are you familiar with a term called flow state?
Yes, very much.
So when you're building these, do you find that most of the time you're able to get into some kind of flow state where, you're so immersed, you sort of lose sense of time, lose consciousness, and next thing you know, it's like 6 hours have gone by, that kind of thing?
Um, yes, I would say the process of working with nature in general kind of taps into that flow state, where it kind of leads to this like almost an egoless state, like um, you're not yourself anymore. You like actually are the environment, um, or there's just this. nonverbal state of mind happening, um, as you're honing in on all these different textures and colors and the way the light moves. Like it's just a different mode of thinking entirely, in my experience. And I don't necessarily lose time because like the sun is always there, and like that's basically my clock or my schedule is, like where the sun is, that's how much time I have left. And um, and so I don't know. Some of us that practice this art call it an awareness art, um, because it does really tune the practitioner into the environment and everything that's going on inside it. I almost feel like a wild animal out there. Like
Mm.
I'll just hear the smallest sounds, um, as I imagine like a deer would hear, like a human approaching or something. Um, but yeah, it very much puts you in this kind of flow state. And like on top of that, just the process of balancing and like feeling these vibrations through the rocks. Like it is a very now process. It only exists in the present, and it like very very genuinely like tunes you in to like a meditative state, just focusing on these vibrations. So in that sense, it it really does turn into kind of like this active meditation, where you're not separate from the environment at all. Like you're just part of it. You're both like an observer and the observed.
Mm, that's interesting. And there's also, it's not just the here and now is in terms of, process, but there's this ephemeral nature to the actual work itself because you're, as I understand it, you're typically, once you're done photographing your work, you're either knocking it down yourself or in some cases you're just, allowing nature to do that. But either way, it's like you spend hours building one of these beautiful structures and it's here 1 minute and it's gone the next. How does that strike you? Do you like that?
It keeps it interesting, um, or keeps it challenging. I think, since about 2016 or 2017, I've gotten a lot more, obsessive about the recording process,
Hmm.
photographing and especially filming. And anyone who's worked with a film crew knows how cumbersome it is to be able to capture the right footage and have like all the gear set up and just all the logistics of doing all that and mix it with this temporary art form that's very vulnerable to almost anything. Um, and so when I do build these things or like have, uh, like a sculpture that I've kind of realized through the process, and I have decided, oh, I want to photograph and film that. Like I want to document it as much as possible while it exists. And so I will go out really early and start building, um, like wind permitting or whatever, um, to maximize the amount of time in the late afternoon that I have to shoot it with like kind of the like almost the orange sunshine of like late afternoon, and the way the creek glows. Like that's those are the, photographic moments that I'm really honing in on both for photo and video, or just like early in the day and late in the day, and kind of all in the middle is, um, more of a building process. And I forgot a little bit where I was going with the recording stuff. Um,
We were talking about the ephemeral nature of it all
yeah,
and
yeah,
sort of the recording.
and they do collapse. And when they do, it's kind of frustrating because I can never get it exactly the same as it was. but I can get it very close to where you won't really notice from photo to photo. So if I really like it, I will rebuild it and usually turn like an hour and a half or 2 hour process into about 10 minutes by building and building and building. And when I get to that point, I start recording the process. So I have like all these demonstrations recorded that are around 10 minutes long of these kind of really crazy structures that would normally take anywhere from like an hour, 1 to 3 hours to execute the first time. So I'll rebuild it and keep shooting. And it's kind of just this very intense process of like trying to capture this thing in the most beautiful kind of light or environment. And I usually just keep doing that until it collapses at some point and one of the rocks that's integral to its structure breaks. Um, and so, like, once that rock breaks, it's really impossible to do that structure again.
Mm.
Um, Especially if it's like one of the longer wings or something that's counterbalanced, like the entire thing changes. It's just not like I may as well just start a new structure at that point.
Right.
Um, and so, like at the end of the day, like in a place like Boulder Creek, the wind is generally very low to zero. And when I finish these things at the end of the day, um, I often just leave them overnight and return to them early the next morning. And almost always they're still standing. And like often they'll stand for up to 48 or 72 hours. And
But they're not
and
standing for years. They're not staying for decades like a piece of art would. And I guess that's where I come back to the fact that whether it's there for an hour or a day or or a few days, it's not there for years and years on end. So there's no other than the photographs you have of it, of course. Um,
Mhm.
which actually I was wondering about when you going back to when you were practicing this as a craft. You had a day job. I assume you weren't in love with your day job. This is where you're spending every free moment you had. So when you got to the point where you felt like, hey, I'm pretty good at this, and you quit your job to pursue this full time, was that an easy decision for you, or did it feel like a pretty risky one? Because it's not like there was I assume, a market for rock balancing art or artists for that matter.
um, it was it was a risky decision, but it also felt natural for the time. Um, because like I quit my regular job in 2012 or like September 2012. And earlier in 2012, that's when I started traveling like to Italy and Canada to like I'm Canadian originally, but I went to Canada for one of the first Stone Balance gatherings. And I started going to these things and pretty immediately becoming inspired by this community um, and like kind of like a little bit understanding like my ability and like what I was capable of, if I just kind of like put myself out there and into it. And so at that point, I was very frustrated with my regular job, and it was just very uncreative and soul sucking, I guess. Um, and so I was just like looking for a reason to quit and move on and whatever, and I felt stuck. And the only thing that made me feel free or like worth anything was like the this creative outlet that I had, um, because I quickly learned that like it touched people in a certain way, um, that was very inspiring to me also, and just to like the feeling that you're doing something valuable in the world or like positively affecting people, is extremely powerful. And so I realized, like through those kind of earlier years, that that's kind of this power I was able to harness with this practice is the way it positively touched people. Like even at the creek, like people would stop and start talking about it and sitting to meditate um, and so it felt kind of like a calling and all of a sudden I kind of like skyrocketed to kind of the top of the art form technically, through all the practice. And so all the pieces were kind of there for me to kind of like flick the switch as far as quitting my job. And like I had been kind of preparing for that moment for several months, just saving up money, just knowing like I want to move on and do something new, and I need like a little bit of financial buffer, um, to take that chance. And the decision to quit my job, like it wasn't planned. It was a very in the moment thing. And it was also inspired by, a kind of psychedelic experience. Um, like I took a personal day and I went hiking in the mountains, Rocky Mountain National Park.
Mm.
And I came back later in the day and was sitting at my favorite park in Boulder, at the time, Evan G. Fine. And it was like late September, and all the trees were starting to kind of yellow, and there was like this pool of water, and I saw a crisp reflection of these yellow trees on the water in this kind of psychedelic state, and was like inspired to do this project and in this pool of water with the reflections and whatever. And it was one of those moments that I had to seize or else just lose it until next year kind of thing. And so I went into work the next day and like I kept track of the time too. And it was like, I think I was sitting at this pool at about 1 and I had to hit the sun position right to get the right reflection and the colors and everything. So I went to my manager at work and I was like, I have to leave. I have to go do this right now.
Mm.
And um, I mean, we were all friends there, and like he knew I was frustrated with the place and wanted to leave. And so he was like, okay, put in your 2 weeks and you can leave. And this was like a Wednesday, I think.
Mm.
And I was like, okay, my last day is Friday. And then I left and just went to do this project, and it worked out to kind of exactly how I envisioned. And
Wow. And the rest is history.
the rest is history. Yeah.
And here we are. So I want to come back to what we started to go down this path of the fact that when there's not a market yet, or there's not this movement, which eventually you would really go on to spur yourself. So there's not a lot of people doing this. There's not a lot of quote unquote competition. Not that that's the right word. So you like to challenge yourself. You like to try to like one up yourself, if I interpreted you correctly. And so when you're the best in the world at something, when there's not a lot of others doing it, it really means setting your own standard. And so when you're setting your own standard, how do you determine what that should be? Is there something, are there goals that you set out in terms of what you're trying to achieve that you haven't before? What drives how you're trying to to one up yourself?
For me, it's mostly just been becoming completely enveloped in the process and totally obsessed with my work and what I'm doing. Like going out and creating something, going home that night and offloading all the memory cards and studying all those images, like really meditating on the structure that I built. And um, and even like I even use this process now is like I study that structure, I find imperfections. Like it's always going to be imperfect and always perfect at the same time. But like I study it and tear it apart and figure out how I could possibly make it better or like more extreme, um, or basically just challenge myself even more than that current version did. And then I go back immediately the next day and do it, and then repeat that process over and over again. And so I don't exactly set a standard for myself. I just kind of step into it every single day, if that makes sense. Like,
Mhm.
I just realize something and I'm like, wow, that's amazing. Now I'm gonna go make it better,
Mm.
or like start a new one and search for that same kind of glow, I guess. Um, th I don't know, I can just describe it as like creative satisfaction or like
Mm.
something something that feels like a new favorite or something that's fresh and amazing, um, and really lights my spirit or my soul up.
And does your soul and spirit get, and not that these are mutually exclusive, but is it more lit up from the aesthetic, the the rock structures and shapes and colors all juxtaposed and the way the light hits it and that kind of thing? Or is it more like back to that? I know gravity is not the right word. We won't use that one, but the way the precarious nature of how these things are stacked that looks like they shouldn't be there. Is it the technical wizardry, I guess, versus the aesthetic?
It's very much both.
Hmm.
Like there's a huge amount of satisfaction that comes from achieving this thing that had me at my limit of what I thought I was capable of, or like even pushes past that what I thought that limit was. Um, but yeah, just seeing these things kind of hanging there, suspended in space, it's kind of like it's kind of like touching infinity, so to speak. Um, and it's a hell of a drug, really, um, to be able to experience these kind of things in person, um, and not just the structures themselves, but like to sit there with them and kind of casually observe the environment happening around it, um, or happening around it, um, is just as inspiring too. And seeing all these different nuances of the way the light hits it at various times of day,
Mm.
and it's always just a wild process because if I go back and try to recreate that, like chances are I can get it pretty close, but even the sun position moves a certain amount of degrees to where
Mm.
like it won't hit the exact same spot again in the same way. Um, and so you start to tune into these kind of nuances of how everything changes all the time and trying to get into that, like integrate with that flow of elements, um, that's totally outside my control is like it's an extremely romantic, um, beautiful, enthralling kind of process. Like it makes me feel alive completely.
Mm. If you could sort of step outside of yourself and observe yourself and see what you've done here. And the I don't like to use the word success, but certainly the uh, the achievement, let's say, that you've had. You get asked to do this all over the world. I mean, you're clearly one of the best, if not the best at it. Beyond passion, which you clearly have, what do you think allows you to perform at the level that you perform? Because if you take anything in life, it takes a sport, an instrument, anything, the game of chess, and you put 100 people that are all passionate, and you have them all focus on it, and you have them all practice, deliberately practice at it, they're not all going to get to the same level. So what do you think is behind some of what you've been able to do here?
Hmm. Well, it's definitely an obsession, and I think that obsession just leads to absurd amounts of practice and just basically never giving up on it. Um, like I don't think I've ever given up on a structure until it's realized to a level that I find satisfying. And I'm not quite sure how that's different from anyone else, other than it's just something that speaks to the core of me that I can't really put in words. It's just kind of this passion that I that requires me to like go this deep with it. Um,
Is there something you think about the way you're wired beyond that? What it sounds like is tenacity and stick to itiveness. Is there something about the actual craft of rock balancing that you think you're naturally wired? You've got some sort of innate talent that, yes, needs to be harnessed, but there was something there that maybe not everyone has?
maybe like some level of anxiety that needs to be diffused every so often.
Okay.
Um, because it is really excellent for that. Just like being out in the elements and nature is a very good anxiety medicine. Um, but take that a step further and like feeling all these rocks and the vibrations and how they all fit together. It's like uh, it's an extra strength anxiety medicine.
Hmm. Well, I've certainly got my share of the anxiety. I don't know if I would have the feel for the vibrations and how these rocks come together, nor the patience to sit there and take the time. So it's really impressive to see what you've done. You've you've really single-handedly, or certainly played a very significant role, Michael, in inspiring this whole global movement for stone balancing art. Why do you suppose it's caught on like that?
I think there's a couple reasons. Like it's a very addictive activity. Just to do these things that kind of like challenge your own perception in a way.
Mhm.
Um, but not only that, it's not like other traditional art forms like paint. Like you don't have to buy anything. You can just go out and do it, and almost anyone on Earth has access to rocks. And it just puts you in this kind of outdoor scenario where it's kind of like our natural state of being. And I don't know, it just has this way of making me feel alive. And um, I imagine that that feeling is not restricted to me. I think it's more of a human condition. Um, and I think when people see something that they think is amazing, especially like online or social media, um, they naturally want to try and see if they can do it themselves. And so, yeah, I think, and also just rocks are just such an ingrained part of human consciousness and worldwide. Like humans have always been building with rocks, and um,
Well, there's the why is it caught fire from the builder perspective, and then there's also from the the viewer perspective. And maybe you alluded to the fact that because it feels so accessible, or maybe because the the way it's so integrated in with nature, or maybe the fact that it's so different and so unique from everything else we see. But I mean, there's certainly become this global virality to all of these pictures and videos of rock balancing all over the world.
mhm.
I mean, I had no idea how, like I said, this started for me for just looking at one of these piles on a little hike I did a couple of decades ago. I had no idea how, I mean, there's millions and millions, tens of millions of people across all these social media platforms, like looking at these videos and pictures of all these formations. So it's clearly, it captured something, right, in the public consciousness. Is there, I mean, there's certainly got to be some pride around that, that you're one of those, that, if you will, the father of this movement, or certainly one of them. Is there any part of you that, I don't know, maybe a little bit annoyed that this movement that you've helped drive has now spurred all these other artists that have maybe started to grab some of that limelight? Do you care at all?
um, I did. I can't say that I still care a whole lot. Um, like that was probably close to 10 years ago when I was stressing more about that kind of stuff. Um, but even still, like just with how our culture is with art, especially, and things like copyright and plagiarism and whatever. Um, I do see elements of that in like artists copying other artists, um, but I consider it also kind of like a waste of energy to hyperfixate on.
Mhm.
Um, because I think it's also like a universal mechanism to imitate one another, to like learn new skills. It's just how the universe learns, essentially. So when people see something, they want to try it. And um, I think it starts to get maybe a bit messy when there's business involved and someone who has dedicated their life to this and like kind of put all their eggs in this basket, so to speak.
Yeah.
Um, like yeah, it can cause discomfort to like see people try to hijack that in a way. Um, but also like I still don't really see any examples that I'm trying to aspire to. Like I try to keep my radar pretty clear as far as stone balancing and just try to stick to like my own creative flow and um, like basically only competing with myself because I see that as really the only competition for myself.
Yep. So I always like to end these interviews with this question. The podcast that we're on here is called The Art of Excellence. Excellence, that word. What does it mean to you if you had to define it?
I don't know, the intricacies of culture make excellence a very kind of messy, subjective kind of word, I would say.
It's completely
Um,
subjective, which is why I like to hear the subjective sort of interpretation from my guests. And by the way,
yeah.
that's the theme of the whole show is the fact that everyone defines their own excellence, what it means to them. It doesn't have to mean anything objectively.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my version of excellence is creating things that like like inspire me. Um, like if I'm able to inspire myself through my own practice, then I would consider that pretty excellent. Um,
Yeah, I'll take it.
yeah. Uh,
That's a good threshold. It's probably a high bar, right? 'Cause it probably takes more and more to inspire yourself, given what you've done. I like it.
right, it is harder and harder. It gets the process gets a bit slower and slower, especially as I get older and
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Well, I I don't know if there is an age where one has to tap out of this field because of the weight of these rocks and that kind of thing. But I hope this continues for you for years and years, decades to come. You are incredible at it. I love spending the time to not just learn about you, but just to, I mean, half the time is just looking at these sculptures. Maybe is the best way to put it. They're beautiful, and uh, this is great. Absolutely a joy to spend time with you, Michael. Thank you for spending time with me and sharing some of what's behind this this inspiration of yours.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It was a nice conversation.